Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning in to the Odd Thoughts podcast. My name is Gunther, and I am your host, and welcome to episode 9. If you're someone who likes to discuss the everyday odd thought, then this might be the type of content for you. I hope to be semi informative, semi entertaining. So if that's something that you might enjoy, then I appreciate you listening. So for episode 9, I kind of wanted to get a little bit into the topic of self love, a little bit of like personal worth, kind of too. And something that I know that I struggle with, very much so. Something that's very personal to me, and I think a very shared struggle with a lot of people. It's something that how the inner feelings equate to the outer feelings, kind of the things you have about yourself, the questions you have about yourself, and it's an important thing to remember that sometimes it's okay to have those qualms about yourself, but to not let it affect you too much, and especially not let it drain you. But before we step into that, how's everybody doing? I hope everybody's doing okay. I know that I'm doing okay. This is a topic that really does hit a lot pretty close to home. So, as something I've always said that I keep trying to put the sentiment out there is that I really want to try to keep on talking about topics that are personal to me, and if those topics are sort of a little bit emotional or they're a little hard to kind of deal with or they come with those kind of harsher realities or a little embarrassing even if you want to say that then that's the topics that I think I want to try to feed into more. I think that in today's day and age, I know that's something that maybe would help me or calm me a lot, especially on the feelings I have towards myself, is hearing a voice that I can relate to, and I just hope to be that. I just kind of keep hoping to be that relatable voice. That every time I hop on the mic, that no matter what I am necessarily talking about, that it feels personable as best as possible, as best as I can. And I know that that's something that I think even in the world of like social media, that even though we're theoretically connected more so than we ever been to so many people at one time, I don't know how personable things are. And even when we're more open about mental health and stuff like that, I don't think it's actually like working through anything. Sometimes it, like I said, it's sometimes it's just affirming things sometimes. And that's not necessarily a state of being you want to be in. You don't just want to affirm the things you feel. You want to work through things. And sometimes maybe affirming is just the basic thing. But at the end of the day, I th- I think that as I do this podcast, I know it's helping me kind of vocalize things, vocalize these feelings. And so if anybody listens and they feel the same way, then I hope that you really do take something from this. I'm still trying to do my best on kind of what kind of form of content I want to do, and I'm really trying my best to not go into that lane of like influencer or like content creator or like just even like a YouTuber, because it's like a weird one track mind. I don't want to just be that. I don't want to just be known as that, a full time creator. I don't want to be that. I'd rather be able to like just do things with creatively, use my voice and hopefully reach out to people. I know that whatever success I achieve, if I ever do with whatever it is, if it's podcasting, if it's, finding a job, a job that I become, super passionate about or whatever, I just know that I'm going to give back. If I get money and I get some sort of notoriety or whatever the hell it is, I'm going to give back. I just know I am. So I just keep pushing. I'm gonna keep pushing, and I'm gonna keep, telling myself that things are working out because they are. I'm showing up for myself every day. What do we say around here? Show up for yourself every single day. That's kind of what I'm trying to do, and I trying to record this podcast. I've kind of struggled with that a little bit too. Like one thing that I get so nervous right before I record a podcast. It's crazy. I don't know why. I spend a lot of my time talking to myself, so what makes it different? That a couple more people are going to listen. That's what it kind of makes it different, I suppose. But if I keep doing it and I keep trying, I think that it's only going to help me like feel more comfortable with it. And I'm kind of trying to get into the mindset of trying to like, even though if I'm not like uploading a podcast every day or even every other day, that I should try to record as often as possible so that I get as comfortable as possible. Because I do know that in these episodes, sometimes I feel like I slip up a little bit. I struggle, and and I'm trying to keep a consistent intro and outro, and so I'm not perfect yet. And I don't know if I ever will be perfect, but I'm having fun figuring it out, working on things, and I've noticed that like the content that kind of sticks, or at least the ones that like I feel like most people have kind of enjoyed, are maybe the ones that where I do talk a little bit about the mental health and talk about more personable topics, stuff that people can relate to a little harder. Because when I talk about like topics like my favorite movies, or my like my last podcast, my favorite rap albums, which didn't do so hot, which is okay. Not everybody wants to listen to those just because like not everybody would have the same opinion, or they're not everybody's into movies or into music or whatever. So it's not doesn't matter to everybody. But I have fun doing it, and I think that's what I got to keep remembering too. Is as long as that I had kind of fun doing it, and doing a little bit of the research behind it, then I'm all right. I'm fine with that. But I kind of realized that maybe I should try to do like, because I have just as much fun doing like these topics, a little more serious topics. So trying to find maybe like that balance, trying to do my best to find the balance between, those more personable, like deeper, like mental health topics, and funner topics. Maybe trying to do like, two in one instead of doing like, I did like my first three were more mental health related, then like the next three were like, more fun related, more fun topics. And then I tried doing like bouncing between the two topics, the two ideologies more so. But I think I should do like, two of the, more mental health things, because that gets me, I think, more flowing into my thoughts. I don't feel as self-conscious, I think, which is funny to say. I feel like self-consciousness comes very heavily with mental health and how you feel about yourself. But like I said, I'm it's embarrassing, yeah, to talk about myself and talk about those things and how I act, but it's only human. And I think it holds me accountable. It puts it into the ether, and it lets me like see it for what it is. And realizing that, like I said, that maybe people do actually like relate to that. And if you relate to that, I would appreciate you reaching out and letting me know. I would. I want to try to connect with as many people as possible, and uh, even though it's hard, and I'm not very good at responding to people. And I've been very fortunate to have people in my life reach out to me recently, and talk about, just saying hey to me, just saying hey, people I haven't talked to in many years. And I know I don't always respond back sometimes, or it take a long time, because you got to think of this. I have this crazy thought process before I even like jump into like texting back anybody or messaging it back anybody or whatever. It's just so funny to think like how many steps it takes for basic task in my life. It just like, it's like even like a shower. Like I was gonna take a shower yesterday. I'll take a shower after I do this, but ew, stinky. But one of those things where it's like I can't. It's not just like, oh, getting clothes. Sorry, it's not just like getting clothes, getting my towel, and jumping in the shower. It's like, oh, I gotta make sure that I do it at this time, and I know that I gotta make sure I pick up the right clothes, because I don't want to be like too stuck to my body. I don't want to feel uncomfortable. I have to brush my hair. Like got long hair, so it's a lot. I don't have to be that complicated, but it's a lot. So a lot of times I think some like even the simplest things, I have like 100 steps I gotta kind of go through before that. But yeah. But besides that, I hope everybody's doing good. I hope that as I keep doing these, I just keep getting more feedback, and if you like this, just keep showing it to people too. And that's a big task, I think, sometimes to ask for, and I feel guilty asking. I really do. I don't, but I do. But I want to make this something, and like I said, I'm trying to do my best to avoid content creation, and or like just being like a content creator or whatever. Like I'll create content, you know what I'm saying? But like I don't want to be an influencer. I don't want to be a YouTuber. Like I want to make sure that I'm doing something creative, and I want this to be able to feed into other things. This is just to get my voice out there, and hopefully bring some realization to myself too. Like something that makes me feel like understand a little bit more about myself. But anyways, let's keep it moving. So like I said, today's episode 9, and I wanted to get a little bit into the idea of self love, your personal worth, and how you feel about it, and the way it affects the world, and how much you keep it inside, and maybe it's through your own personal thoughts and dilemmas, or it's how people treat you, or how life responds to you. So we'll get a little bit into that though. I know it's like I said earlier, it's something that I struggle with. I talk about how often that I use such poor language when I talk to myself. Like, I don't ever give myself the benefit of the doubt. I don't ever think I can do something. And so it really stalls me out. It really does. And that's a sentiment to, I think, a little bit of never maybe achieving super big heights in life, which is what to whatever, level or weight you decide. But also, I think it's something that it has to do a lot with how I talk. Like I said, how I talk to myself, the language I use towards myself. And I know that I don't think very kindly of myself. So I'm my number one enemy. I'm literally my number one enemy, and it stops me from doing a lot of things in life. I feel like a lot of times that I start to get kind of I reject myself. I have this kind of hatred and this perception that I don't deserve a certain thing. Like, I don't that people aren't my friends, so nobody wants me. That nobody wants me, or that like. I'm not doing very successfully in my job, so that, my job just doesn't appreciate me, or I absolutely suck at my job, or something like that. That's not necessarily true. It'd be silly to maybe sit there and deny that it may not be true, but I think more so it could be, it's hard to say a delusion because delusion is a very harsh term, but it could be one of those things that it's built up. And I think that even that realization is hard. So really, I know that it always starts with it's just like with most stuff. It kind of starts with that conceptualization of what do you feel? What are the feelings? What aspects of your life do you really question about your self love and your personal worth? And I think a big thing I think we really think about is we think about more, not necessarily when it comes to like success, but it comes to like maybe a certain, I know for me it's more like an unwantedness. I know that sometimes I can feel very like unwanted in life. When no, I don't have friends, but also I'm not a very extroverted person. I'm not dating anybody, but also I don't put myself out there like that. So that's something that feeds into that self-hatred, that poor self-perception of myself. I really get like stuck on those ideas of like I was like of like everything that happens to me equates directly to who I am as a person, which isn't necessarily true. Sometimes it's time tells of like different like paths that things take. In one moment, life may be very lucky for you and very accepting, and in another, not so much. So it's important not to try to like think too much on that stuff, to try to dwell too much on that. But when with not only when you're building it up in your own mind, but when there is like outer aspects of life, when that affects you, then it's hard not to feel a little bit hate towards yourself. It's very hard not to feel that way or question that worth that you have in life. And that's even a big question of like, what is even really worth? Where do you find the worth? And how much can that help you with your self love? Like, how much can that help with that self care, that respect that you have for yourself? That's a big thing. And it's a big thing, I think, to even realize that you maybe suffer from that poor self love, that poor self perception. Like I said, I know that it's something that I struggle with 100%. I literally think that I'm not good enough for things. And I'm just not going to be able to be good enough too, which is another kind of dreaded way to think is to think that then you can't improve. But if you sit there and you dwell on this stuff, then you may never improve. If you're constantly sitting and thinking about these like couple bad things, and you're never really going to sit there and ever think about the good things, whatever those good things are. And it's got to be plenty, and you realize that a lot of positives actually are there, and the negatives weren't actually that serious. And actually, really doesn't you don't really know what the negatives maybe were. Like I said, time tells, time heals. So if you wait certain things out, then you may find out that things weren't as serious. And maybe just in that moment, you kind of you felt like there was a personal attack on you. That's the thing, is it's to feel like it's not too personal. And always remembering that it's hard to like just straight up say that they're like just straight up say what self love is even. That's even like I feel too much of a blanket term. Even when as I'm saying it now, I feel like it's like what does that even really mean? I feel like respect, I think, is a big thing. I think one of the big things, like one of the bigger components of self-love is that idea of respect, giving yourself respect. How do you talk to yourself? Making sure that you're not putting yourself in super uncomfortable situations. Obviously, there are circumstances that uncomfortability helps you grow and are extreme motivators, but making sure that you know that you can't handle that. And also making sure that you know that maybe that the way you're feeling is going to outwardly affect certain things in your life, and give yourself that respect of not letting it flow into let that negative flow into the positive. And that's a and leading into talking to yourself better. That's another leading into respect, is like talking to yourself correctly. Making sure that you're not sitting there and just calling yourself dumb and stupid, and because you're not good at your job or something like that, that you're like unsuccessful and you're lazy or something like that. That's a big thing. Like I said, with me, I talk to myself so crappily. I talk to myself just like I'm a piece of shit, and it doesn't make any sense. Sorry for my language. So I try my best to, like, when I get into those kind of like that feeding of poor language into my head, like I try to then reverse it and then speak some positive. And as simple as literally just saying it into the ether, this imaginary ether that sits above everybody's head. It's just one of those things where you have to hear that positive language. You have to hear it to know. You can't just assume that it's going to work. That's a tough thing too. That's more delusional than anything. It's just when you're sitting there, you're not actually improving, but you're trying to act like you are. But it takes time. Like I said, it takes time. And then also that self-care. That's a big component of self-love, is making sure that you're taking care of yourself, that you're as basic things as like hygiene, right? Like, like I said, I struggle to take a shower sometimes, struggle to brush my teeth sometimes because I just don't even believe that I deserve it or something weird like that. I'm not presentable in general. Like, I'm not a good person. Nobody wants to see me. So why should I be clean and have good teeth? Well, that's for my health. Like, I got to kind of remember that. I'm not going very far in my job, so it must mean I'm a piece of crap. It must mean that I'm lazy. It's like, well, maybe not necessarily. Maybe actually the best thing to do for yourself to take care of yourself is to go away from that job, because maybe that job is stupid. Maybe that job is what's hurting you, and maybe that one of those things where it's like, just because, like I said, just because I'm not being seen by people and people don't aren't necessarily around me and are friends with me, doesn't mean I shouldn't take care of myself in the hygiene way. So yeah, respect and talking to yourself in a good way, in that self care, very much so. I think that's what affects, like, not directly majorly affects like self love, but I think that's something that can take you out of a poorer mindset of self love, of your perception of personal worth. And that's a big thing too, is also making sure that you're finding the wins throughout the life, that your life, when you do wake up and you brush your teeth and you take a shower and you kind of get through that fog of like, oh well, I know I need to do that. Well, that's kind of putting worth to yourself. You're kind of putting it, you're feeding back into yourself. You're speaking positively to yourself, and so you start to believe it a little bit, and that ups your worth a little bit. It's always about personal worth. It's not like a perception of what society or other people view your worth as. It's that personal worth. How are you navigating through the world? Where are your wins? Where are your, ups? Where are those coming from? And how are you responding to the downs? And are you finding the down, poor aspects? Are you really finding those to affect you heavily? That's big, and such a personal thing. I think that's a big question also of, is it really a personal dilemma, or do you feel like it's maybe in the moment or in general that maybe aspects of outer life are kicking you in the butt? That's because you can't ignore the outside world. As cloudy and dark and gloomy as the inside may be, or not. Maybe you have a good, view of self love. That's another thing, is the positive. But at the end of the day, the outside world is still there. And it can honestly care less sometimes of what you're dealing with inside your head. You may be having the crappiest day, and you have all these kind of things and these qualms about yourself, and you've been just questioning all this stuff, and you just kind of been in a bad mindset. But the world's still not gonna, it don't know. The world doesn't know. So when things then kind of pile on, or it feels like it piles on to that already like poor aspect, then then you start to feed into it, and that becomes really easy to feed into it. So to really separate that personal dilemma from those aspects of the outside world, and how you're treated and how things respond to you, that's a big key separation, or a key forward pusher of, like, make sure to separate those things. And also remembering that you're always going to have maybe personal dilemmas, that you're always going to have maybe these certain problems and questions and challenges that you're going to work through, whether it be 100 things or one thing. You never know. So you got to remember that. And so when the outside world is piling on you, then you got to remember that you still have to deal with these things. That's a separate situation. And then if that outside world happens to bring on a little bit of that poor negative energy and leads to that question of, self-love and that question of your worth and stuff like that, yeah, it's that's a tough thing too, because then, like I said, it feels like the piling on. It feels like that you're kind of getting you already had, like I said, everybody has the questions about themselves. So then when these outspat, it feels like the outside aspects, whatever those outside aspects may be, are only affirming those like personal dilemmas, and you don't want that. And when you respond a certain way, especially when you let those personal dilemmas affect you, and you respond to things in the world a certain way, you got to know that they'll respond back, because everybody does have a personal struggle. So as you are trying to navigate in your bubble and your own, you're just doing your best navigating your area, your little world, that it's gonna inevitably bump into others. And so that's a shared struggle that we have, is that, like, what are we doing in life? How do we view ourselves, and how are we putting ourselves forward, and how are we letting that's everybody has that struggle. So you really do have to realize that you're not alone, but you do have to take care of yourself in that way. You got to realize that these personal dilemmas may be built up, or maybe that they're only being fed in by the outside aspects of life. And to make sure that those personal dilemmas don't feed into those outside aspects of life, not too heavily. Obviously, if it's all it's if you have that positive self love, let that affect you. We're trying to navigate the poor to the positive, is at the end of the day kind of always that focus in general with mental health, is moving from the darker aspects to those lighter aspects, but knowing that the dark is still there, those shadows still sit there. That's a tough concept that I have a lot of times, is I'll have a good day and thinking that that's kind of the turn, right? That, I have the good day now. I know that I'll have a good day for the rest of the week. Every day this week's gonna be good, and try my best to wake up every day and view that, because especially like if I think like yesterday or the day before, having a good day, then that makes me want to have another good day. But then obviously things in the world will affect me in a certain way, and I try my best not to let it, but with the personal conflict I have with myself, it's hard not to. It really is. Yeah, and I think a lot of things, a lot of the major things is you tend to dread on the most insecure, fearful things or whatever. Those things that you attack yourself, I think, most heavily for are the most dreaded thoughts. Those are the most fearful thoughts in a way. So, like I said, I feel my biggest thing is I always feel a little bit like unwanted. Unsuccessful is another thing, but unwanted. I just always feel generally pretty unwanted. And I think about it in the sense of like, oh, I'm never around anybody. Like nobody ever hits me up and texts me and calls me, and so I must be a piece of shit. Or girls don't like me. Girls don't smile at me, so I must be ugly. I must be just gross. So then I really start to get super on that, super into that dreaded like mindset. And that's the big bads that feels most strong and are the easiest to pick out. Just like when you have super intense good moments, those can be remembered pretty easily, usually. And that's a good thing, because you had such a positive, connection to that. So it would 100% make sense that when there's those really bad, strong, bad, negative things, that you would remember those too. So I sit there and I get really dreaded. I dreaded thought thinking. I don't know how to describe that. Dread thinking is how I try to like tell it. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. Especially when you sit there and you start to let one thing pile up, and then one little thing, and maybe you get a new kind of thing to question yourself, a new thing to hate about yourself. I think then things can pile up. And there was always a joke that Dane Cook used to tell, where he used to talk about like sometimes you just need to cry. You're just like, you're not particularly sad about one thing, but you just need to cry. So you spend like the whole day trying to build yourself up, and then you get home, you close the door, and you just like let it all out. You just bawl your eyes out, and you say things, and you remember times of your life that really get you emotional. And that's something that I've always been a very cathartic feeler, however you want to say that, Whenever I get angry or I feel sad or I feel happy, I have a tendency to like feed into that energy. When I get mad about one specific thing, then I start to get mad about a lot of things. And that's not healthy, but that's how the dreaded thinking kind of happens. You kind of then start to snowball. And then you all of a sudden you're reflecting on the biggest questions you have on yourself. Those biggest questionnaires of your self-love, your self-perception, and what you view as your worth. So, it's important to not try to let that build up, and it's hard to say then to work things out as they come along because, like I say, questions will always be there, and time will only tell if it comes around or if things get worked through or if it comes back around. Where things come back into question. So, it's hard to say just to work on every aspect as it comes because that's almost like an impossible thing. But then it's way easier to sit there and just think about all the hate you have towards yourself and all that poor, perception you have of yourself. And it's a quick way to drain yourself. It's a quick way to drain that energy. And then you don't want to do anything. You don't want to work through anything because you just constantly like reaffirm these personal dilemmas you had with yourself. And and reaffirmed delusionally, reaffirmed, real truthfully, who knows? Like I said, you may there are things you're gonna have with yourself, and they may be true that you've built up in your head, but they also may not be true. You never know. Well, you do know, but it's you do know. It's just one of those things where you can't let affect your life too much. You have to try to keep control of that and do those things. Like I said, talking to yourself positively and making sure that you're comfortable in situations. That's a big thing that's going to help with that at least going towards a more positive view of your self-love of that personal worth. And I think a big thing is that fear. Like I said, with the dreadedness comes that fear, and then you start to like get scared about doing things. Like when I sit there and I start thinking about how unwanted or whatever I am, and I start crapping on myself, or I'm not very fulfilled in life, I'm not doing the things that I want to do or whatever. Then I start getting scared that I'll never do it, that I'm never gonna have friends or something like that because of the way that I think, and that way that I might let it betray myself in life. And the same thing with like if I sit there and I'm not super motivated in the job because I feel like XYZ about it or whatever, like then then I'm gonna sit there and never be truly good at it, or I'm never gonna be able to maybe think about moving up or whatever it is. So if I'm sitting there, and I'm kind of already scared about the thought of conceptualizing and then how I let it affect my life, then I'm not even working through nothing. Then I'm just stalled, and I let fear consume me pretty easily. That's something quite often that I feel is that fear of doing anything, and it comes with that conceptualization of self my hating myself and having that poor self love and having that like have me thinking that I don't have that personal worth in life, that I don't have anything to really like bring to the table theoretically, that I don't have anything that I really truly like think that is good about myself. And so then I just count myself out, and then that gets me scared. It gets me scared that I'll never achieve anything, or I'll never actually try to like get over it. And then the fear of being uncomfortable, then I force myself into thinking a certain way or dealing with something, and then that becomes uncomfortable, and then I feel like a failure because I was already uncomfortable from the get-go, and then of course I would fail. But that's and like again, it's all in the way I think of how you let it affect your outside life. As much as I can internalize these fears, I try my best to not let it affect my outside life. I try to like think I try to think passively, very like neutrally when it comes to when it comes to certain circumstances. Yeah. And very much so on the sentiment of feeling unwanted and feeling unsuccessful or feeling unfulfilled. I think those are big motivators into self-love. Not specifically that, because like I said, sometimes the outside world can be very cold. Can be very cold. Not just in your personal world, but things sometimes feel like they navigate outside of their worlds, outside of their bubbles into yours. And just because someone told you something or didn't give you a chance and whatever, it doesn't mean it's true. At the end of the day, you're gonna have to kind of struggle with it in your own head, in your own mind. So that's something that you're gonna have to be left with. So when these when those feelings of being unwanted and you're unfulfilled and maybe unsuccessful, the uns, it's obviously gonna feed right into that poor self perception, that poor self love. And but I wouldn't say, but it's hard to say that it's a sole equator of those feelings. Just because you're unwanted, it doesn't mean that just because you're a bad person or you have like because of all the bad things you think about yourself. It's not that at all. It's just sometimes maybe it's just sometimes you're just not around a bunch of people. And sometimes you just like in this moment you're just unwanted because people are wanted, people kind of got what they wanted out of others, you know what I'm saying? And so you just miss out on that opportunity. Or you feel unsuccessful because this job you have, you take it so seriously, but it really ain't that serious. And so you start to think like, oh, I'm lazy, or everybody hates me at the job, but the job just might not be that good of a job. And the people around you might be so underperforming that it makes you feel like you're underperforming. And then unfulfillment. I think that's a good way to distract yourself from having to think about self love, and a good way to, I think, push into the personal worth is fulfillment. So when you feel unfulfilled, and that leads into unwantedness and unsuccessfulness, that's kind of that unfulfillment, the general feeling of unfulfillment. When you have the empty spaces, something's got to fill it. So if you're someone that has these negative thoughts and you're on leaning towards the side of like having a poor self idea of yourself, then that's what's going to fill those empty spaces. And so, and it's not to say that then like all of a sudden hanging out with everybody is going to change things, or getting a different job, or filling your life with all these things are all of a sudden going to change that, because you can still feel so empty with a bunch of stuff around you. People can sit there and say, like people can sit there and say, "Oh man, you're so great, Gunther. I love you. Like you're such a handsome person, and you do so good at work, and you're so good at this, and you're so good at that." But up in my head, I'm thinking, yeah, whatever. Yeah, I've heard that before. Okay, whatever. I'll see it to believe it there, which is just not a good way to think either. But I can't fight that inner voice sometimes. It's hard to fight that inner voice. My inner voice is so loud that it's going to over trump anything. But you got to realize that when people say something to you, they may be truthful, they may not be truthful, but you should try to take it as truthful. David Goggins one time, he was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and David Goggins was saying like, maybe someone comes up to you and calls you fat. That's mean. Yeah, that's for sure mean. But maybe you're fat. Maybe you are fat. Maybe maybe someone calls you an idiot. That's not nice, but maybe you're just stupid. That's a harsh thing to realize too, is that maybe you are this way. And especially when you let those aspects of self-hatred and poor self-love and those questions towards personal worth, when you let those things feed into your personality and how you treat others, especially when you think that because of how you view yourself, that's how others should view you, and then you respond equivocally to it or whatever. I think it's it's just feeding into a bad space. It's just feeding into a bad kind of energy or whatever. Yeah. So, and I think that there's a big, I always remember as a kid, it was the big sentiment of, treat yourself how you would want to be treated or whatever, or treat others how you would want to be treated as well. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's a hard sentiment because I one time heard from someone, whatever, someone smarter than me, maybe, who knows? But I heard one time that people have a tendency to treat themselves how they think they should be treated subconsciously, not as in like what you speak into the world and you think that you need a little more money, you think you deserve this, but there's a subconscious that always kind of flows through people where they feel they treat themselves accordingly. So when you start to feed into those bad aspects of yourself, your self perception, the self love, and I think that then, you know, unconsciously, you're going to treat yourself in a bad way. You're going to put yourself in uncomfortable situations, and you're going to count yourself out before you even count yourself in. And it's just going to snowball into more mistreatment. And then people don't even, and then it's like, then things close out a little bit. Then that bubble kind of hardens or whatever. And as you're trying to like navigate with your bubble and you bump into other bubbles and maybe you start to connect things, the more that you kind of treat yourself poorly, it's only going to feed into that closing of that bubble, that theoretical bubble. Everybody has one. It's just an interesting thing to think about. Even though you want, like I said, you speak into your mind, you want like better things, and you want like money, you said, oh, I do want these things, I think I deserve these things, I think da 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 da. But subconsciously your brain's kind of fighting that ideology. And so that really does that starts with that how speaking to yourself positively and making sure that you understand that these personal dilemmas not necessarily are true. That it's okay to have qualms and push yourself forward, but they're not necessarily true. And and it's always opposed to I don't even know what it means to necessarily deserve, like what do you deserve, but at least what you need. Depriving yourself of basic things like working a decent job or being around at least a couple people and being in a relationship and taking care of yourself like hygienically and in a personal way. I think feeding into those aspects of self-love, you got to remember that it's based really more so on what you need. You deserve to have what you need, the things that can fulfill those empty spaces. So if you're sitting there and you feel and your subconscious is poor and you kind of have that always those back thoughts and you constantly kind of have this kind of negative space and like I said, it sits there. It will always sit there. The shadows will always be there, but if you let it take the forefront and you let it affect all the other aspects of like not just the thinking, but then how you treat yourself, that's in then how you treat others. That's negative. It's only going to be a negative outcome. So it's important to try to feed into what you need. You deserve to have what you need. That's a big sentiment. And even like I said, what does it even deserve? What does that even mean? But to have those basic fulfillments, to make sure that you remember that you do have good things about yourself, that there are positives to you, that maybe you have this thought at this one moment that maybe time will tell a different story. I like that. I try to keep that sentiment of time can tell. You never know. I like to think, especially with my own mental health, I like to think that I'm not always going to be this way, and I'm not going to. It doesn't mean that tomorrow I'm going to be better, or 5 years or from now, or 10 years from now. But I have the idea that one day it's going to be different because I'm getting tired, man. I'm tired of feeling the way I feel. I'm tired of talking to myself how I talk. So I'm tired of having that poor, view of myself. So I think I got to work on those components and treating myself better. You know, And then also something that was really hard, especially when I started kind of becoming, more serious about my mental health and actually trying to go get help for my mental health is realizing that things are kind of built up sometimes. That there are, like I said, it's hard to say delusional, like that's kind of a harsh like term to use, but actually like maybe realizing that they are a little bit delusional, that they've been built up, that you've kind of fed into the ego for too long. I talked to myself so poorly for so long. I was so down on myself for so freaking long. And it's only recently have I thought otherwise. Is it only recently that I kind of like, I used to think I wasn't very handsome or very good looking, but it's only recently that I've kind of started to say, hey, like, we're not bad. You're going through, you're handsome. You don't do very much by letting your hair grow out and letting your mustache grow over your freaking lip and stuff, you grosso. But like I realize that I'm a lot better than I am. I'm smarter than give myself credit for. I'm funnier than I give myself credit for. And when I was working in the workforce and stuff like that, like it was one of those things where I just felt like I was so useless all the time. But it wasn't that. It wasn't. I have so many people that I used to work with, or when I left, that literally were devastated that I left. And you're like, well, why didn't you say anything when I was there? But you realize that they don't know. Like I said, the outside world doesn't know what you're doing on the inside. So I built it up in my head that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't deserve this stuff, that da 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 da. And that was really what kind of like has led, I think, heavily into my poor perception of my self love and in making me feel like I don't have any worth. And I can't sit here and not admit that some things of the aspect were outside world, have hurt me, but that, like I said, time in that time it hurt, but these things aren't around anymore. Certain people have made me feel shitty about myself, but they're not around anymore. That job I was talking about that I felt so lazy and so useless at, I don't have to do that job anymore. And the unfulfillment that I've had for so long in so many different aspects of my life, I'm finally filling in. I'm finally filling in those empty spaces. So that's making sure that I'm understanding that it's okay to have those ideas, those personal qualms and those questions, but when I give it weight, realizing that I might be just giving it too much. It's important to think about things and question yourself and always improve, but when you sit there and you're not actually answering the questions, that's a big sentiment. That was always something I was so confused with, especially when I started getting help for my mental health, is I had questions, but I didn't have answers. So I constantly were asking these questions and like forcing these questions on myself, and it wasn't helping me. And then when I started giving, getting answers and coming up with some of the answers myself and realizing, like, actually understanding these things, trying my best to. I'm not perfect, obviously. I'm not a doctor. I don't have like a psychology major or anything like that. I'm just crazy. But just making sure that you, and also knowing that sometimes in life you're just not wanted in spaces, not as in like physically people don't want you there, or you're unsuccessful, because you're a piece of shit. Sorry for my language, but it's one of those things where sometimes you're just not in that space isn't for you. Like I said, we're trying to navigate in the little bubbles that we have, and so you may be compatible to certain moments and you may not be compatible to certain moments. So you shouldn't take it up too harshly when things don't work out, when you're not making friends or you're not dating anybody, or like these little outside aspects that could feed into the inner. It's okay sometimes. You shouldn't let it do that way. The inner should never affect the outer, and the outer should never affect the inner. But when it does, you make sure that you're answering the questions. That you when you have these qualms, that you realize that some things shouldn't be so powerful in my head and really don't matter. you know at different times they may matter, but most things won't. At the end of the day, it's all about the fight that you have in your head. It's about that struggle in your mind, and that's what matters. As long as you're okay, as long as you're okay with that. Yeah. Okay. Whatever that means, to being okay, but realizing that also, yeah, just it's okay to not always be okay. That's a big thing. That's something that is like something I hear a lot nowadays, is it's okay to not be okay. And yeah, it is. It really is okay to not be okay, but it shouldn't just be that basic like affirming of like, "Oh, you're not okay." Then well, that's okay. You're not okay. You should be working on things. But also realizing that it does take time, and if you're not okay, then you might as well work on it to not let it bleed into the outside aspect. When you have those bad, that bad self love aspect, point of view, or you have like no conception of personal worth in your life or whatever, or perception of personal worth, like just remembering that that it's okay. Let's work through it, because but it will not be okay if you're sitting there and you're just letting it take over you. If you're letting it feed into that darkness, if you're constantly reiterating the bad negative things about you, then it's not okay. Then it is not okay to not be okay. But I think you give it time. Big healer is time. And I know that a lot of times I don't think people have like tools or the aspects or know how to work through that kind of stuff. Working through and progressing in your own your self-love, how you view yourself, making sure that you're okay, using positive language, especially like if you grew up in a certain scenario and you never saw, people believe in themselves, then how are you supposed to believe in yourself? If you've never been taught, if you've never been taught how to speak to yourself correctly, or self-reflect, then how are you supposed to do it? So you got to give people the benefit of the doubt in that way sometimes, and not everybody's going to be receptive too. I think there's still a little bit of like a tepidness around kind of that self love, and nobody wants to get sappy when they talk about that. However sappy you want to be, but you got to make sure that you're showing up for yourself, and that you're putting the right stuff into your mind, and you're only speaking positively. And when those negative, like I said, when those negatives do come up, that you're making sure to shift that energy and realize that those powers may be, but I have to work through those struggles and equate certain things in my life to make sure that I know that I'm worth it. Remember the good things. Maybe trying to fulfill your life with different things, friends, jobs, hobbies, passions, whatever it may be. Trying to fill in those empty spaces. That's an important thing, is filling in those empty spaces. So, to leading into like when I think finally, when you're working through, when you're finally maybe realizing that there's a launching point to where you're at, where maybe you've hit a rock bottom, and you may hit rock bottom a couple times, but it's about to launch then afterwards. We're all gonna have the chance to do so. So to make sure that you sit there and you don't judge yourself, like when you have questions about yourself, that's a normal thing. To sit there and then judge yourself based off of those things is a very harsh thing. It's a very harsh reality. and you sit there, and especially me, I know I sit there, and just because one little bad thing, right? I have one little tinge that then I'm judged so judgmental on that because maybe I wasn't super, efficient in this or prophetic in this or whatever the heck that that then I'm just so harsh on myself. Like I said, using such poor negative language towards myself and judging myself, making sure that and making it seem that I am this piece of shit, like building myself up to be this terrible person, which I know that I am not. And then sometimes I'm shamefully admitting that I think I've let my own personal views sometimes affect how I view others. Realizing that maybe other people's like because they have a smile more often than I do, that they really ain't got nothing going on, which that's just not true. I realize, or like you got money, which is something that like holds on me a little bit. It's one of those things that doesn't directly affect my self love necessarily, but my worth. I think that like money is something that it equates my worth for somehow, but it really doesn't. But it's one of those things where then if I think that someone's making more money than me, then they ain't got no problems or whatever, which is just not true. Like I said, everybody's got a little bubble that they're trying to navigate in, and it's just impossible sometimes, not impossible, but it could feel very improbable to work through. So I sit there and I've been very guilty of judging other people, but I got to remember that I think it's more so not just an actual hatred towards people. It's this weird self perception I have of myself, and then I think that people equate to that, however that is. So I sit there and I try my very 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 best to think of good things about myself, to make sure that I'm popping or pushing in the positives, to making sure that I don't give that negative energy. I can extinguish it quickly with making sure that I remember that I've done all these other things in my life, and yeah, I'm better looking than I think, and I have done better at jobs, and I could do this and I could do that, and oh yeah, I guess I'm this and that and da 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 and da 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 I know it makes me feel good when I think that way. I know it only boosts and it does feel sometimes very temporary and fleeting, but that's because of how often I feed into the negative. If I sat there and I fed into those positives more, and I realized all the good things about myself, and realized I am worth something, that I do have, I am capable of being loved, and I do love myself. That that's gonna eventually, hopefully, take over more so than negatives. Negatives will always be there, but if I'm thinking more positively, then those negatives will feel just fleeting, as do the positives right now in my life. And and that's such a even in the small minuscule ways. I think just remembering that there are good positive aspects, and that when you're up against a wall and you're kind of backed into the corner or whatever, that there's only one way, and that's forward. That's outwards. So you gotta kind of keep that mentality of like, well, I'm in this kind of zone right now. I'm freaking out a little bit. I kind of hate myself. I'm not really doing much in my life. I'm unfulfilled. Then you got to remember that then, well, then what else, well, that's not just all of you, right? That's just the things that are going wrong with you right now. What's going right? Who's in your life that you love, that actually pays attention to you? What are the good things you do at your job? What are the cool little hobbies that you like doing that you maybe don't feed into that often? Making sure that you take care of yourself, making sure that you're not judging yourself, making sure that you respect yourself. Those are the kind of the it's a task. It's a checklist that you got to kind of go through, but nothing in life is workless, right? Everything takes work. You got to put in some freaking effort to do something with yourself, to work through it. And it's not just working a 9 to 5, you know what I'm saying? You got to work on the mental health too. You got to sit there and deal with it. Sitting there and questioning yourself is so hard. Sitting there and like actually thinking about what actually makes you upset about yourself, and what you're actually just delusional on. That's a tough question. Because then also sometimes like the outside aspects of the world can almost affirm it at times. And that's a tough thing. But just making sure that you give yourself a chance, but not judging yourself too hardly. Letting yourself, remember the good, feeding into the positive aspects of self love. And even when it's not like you're not overly positive about it, making sure that you do find positives. And that if when you're backed up against that corner, that you're only pushing out, you're going outwards. And remembering that it takes time. That's a sentiment I keep saying over this whole podcast, and we're kind of wrapping up a little bit here. Is just remembering that time heals everything. It really, 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 really does. And we don't know how much time we have. And unfortunately, if you sit there and you don't do anything about this self hatred and trying to do things to up your personal worth and how you view yourself, think I think time then slips away. Obviously, it's only moving. So you got to realize is as you're taking small steps, that time is only feeding into that good. You're taking the small steps, and small steps are going to take time. And so as that time passes, you know that the healing is beginning. And that's something that's tough, especially when you have such a big picture. I always feel like I look at an end goal and I don't always look at the little steps before. I want to be happy, but maybe I don't know what it takes to be happy. Maybe I don't know what it takes to like take the first step into happiness. So for more often than not, I try to find I try to find like safe spaces for myself. I get very overstimulated with things, and so I try to separate myself and go into my room. And then when I'm in my room and I'm thinking all crappily about myself, and I'm really feeding into that hatred, that then gives me a chance to I'm separated all of a sudden. I'm kind of by myself and I talk out loud and I say these things, these qualms I have with myself, and then I find the ridiculousness sometimes, and I could take away the power of that stuff, or realize that this is a very serious thing in my life and I should give it power and I should take care of it. But I have to find that kind of safe space, and maybe some people's safe space is being around other people, or even not even just with people, but like a safe space in the way of like when I come on and I do a podcast. I know I get nervous before I do a podcast, but I know that this is a safe space. I got my microphone in front of me and I'm in my my closet, and I know that I'm doing myself justice by saying something out loud and working through these things, and try my very best to like keep it so fresh and so off the top, and just so I don't want to sit there and think about it too much. And so when I speak it into existence and I do things like with the podcast, and it's helping me fulfill myself a little bit. Try my very best to do so. And I think that's finding safe spaces. Like I said, I think that's important, not just in being around people, being by yourself, but in what you fulfill these spaces with, finding these safe things to do. Hobbies is a big thing. It makes me feel productive, and it makes me feel like I'm achieving something. And it makes me and that's kind of a self-love language too. Is everybody's got kind of a love language, right? Maybe you're someone who likes physical touch, or you like service or affirmation or something like that. So I find that sometimes I think like I feel very good about myself when I'm achieving something, but also when people tell me I'm achieving something, or people tell me I'm doing good. But you're not always going to get that stuff, which is okay. But like I realize that's kind of my love language, is even my self-love language is I need people to tell me that I'm doing good. But you could also, if I don't always have people around me telling me that I'm doing good and they love me and stuff like that, then I got to make sure I fulfill these spaces, and actually thinking I'm completing tasks. So that makes me feel that really leads into that personal worth, and really helps me with my self view of like my self perception of self love, self. And just making sure I stay my individual too, making sure that when I see other people's problems, that they're not my problems, and my problems aren't other people's problems. And just because someone was affected heavily by a certain aspect of their life, that I don't have to be that heavily affected as well, that I could then take control. And that's a big thing, is even when you see maybe in your own interpersonal life, or in that little circle that you have, maybe you see that people aren't very good at that stuff, that's kind of a common idea, is poor self-love amongst those people, or amongst just the things in life. You're working jobs that you're not necessarily going to work high in, or you're doing hobbies that you don't have 100% passion in. But you got to remember that because other people just haven't done the things too. Like if other people have look like they've lost control and are unable to do it, and they sit in the same kind of like bracket as you or whatever, they kind of have their bubbles right next to yours, doesn't mean that's how you're going to end up. You're an individual. Individualism is very important with self-love. Remembering that at the end of the day, it's your struggle, and that there are going to be things that are going to kick you down, and it almost feels like there are people out there, especially the ones that have let it kind of affect them, that they're going to seemingly attack other people's self-worth and self-love. So you got to remember that you're that individual. You're the person that's going to determine that. You can take it, and it's going to hurt probably whatever happens, but you're going to have to deal with that struggle. And remembering to feed into the good aspects to fight that struggle. Remember that you got to, like I said, giving yourself respect, showing up for yourself, talking to yourself positively, taking care of yourself, and also realizing the battles aren't always there for you to win or be included in. You got to realize that sometimes that you're going to be stuck with a problem maybe for a little while. So you win the other battles and you let time heal. Yeah, that's it. You know what I'm saying? That's episode 9, self-love, personal worth. Yeah. I had some stuff written down on these like topics, the little kind of points I was trying to hit, and I'm still trying to get a little bit better at that. I find that I'm trying to get into a habit of like before I do an episode, I'm trying to like ask the questions, kind of different bulletin points, but then also like kind of writing out like a little thesis or a little paragraph underneath it, kind of giving myself like an outline. And I don't follow it very strictly. I didn't follow it very. Some of the language that I was using was overly complicated. But yeah, but nonetheless, self love. That's a topic that really hits very harshly for me, very very close to home, and I know that, and something that was very embarrassing for me to kind of think about talking about too is, and I've only really talked about minimally about myself, and there's only so much I really feel comfortable. I think about letting out, but I want to be more comfortable. Like I said, with this podcast, I want this to be a personable thing. Every time I hop on the mic, I want to make sure that the opinions I'm speaking are my opinions and that they very much so affect the way that I think, and that I'm not trying to appease other people's thoughts necessarily. If these are your thoughts, then you can relate to it, then cool. If these aren't your thoughts and you have some sort of opposition to them, cool. Let me know. You know what I'm saying? Like, I want engagement just as much as anything. I want people to tell me their struggles. I want people to leave comments, I just want to always make sure that I want to be able to capitalize on myself more so than anything. Not just capitalize on having a podcast where I could just say whatever. Capitalizing on an opportunity to hold myself accountable. To have my thoughts be used, because they're useful to me. When I sit there and I think about it, they're useful to me. But they do clog up and they make me feel very, they get me a little antsy and they get me a little angry and they get me a little upset and a little anxious and a little embarrassed. And so if I vocalize it, I think that it makes me feel a little bit better. But yeah, I appreciate everybody for listening. I really do. This one, I'm hoping, like I said, I'm going to try to do more more about like the mental health and personable content, and try to do like maybe 2 to 1, where do like 2 episodes of like mental health kind of themed episodes, and then do kind of one that's a little more like fun topicy. You know what I'm saying? But anyways, I think I'm kind of done for this. I'm gonna try to keep the outro a little short on this. I've been on yeah, almost an hour. Pretty good. But I appreciate everybody to for listening to the podcast. This is episode 9, and I'm gonna upload it on YouTube. My podcast is called the Odd Thoughts Podcast. Like I said, it's on YouTube. I have other episodes, so I appreciate anybody going and checking those out. And if you want to follow me on other social medias, I'm up on a couple different things. I'm working on maybe trying to get on other things, but for right now, you can follow me on Facebook under Gunther Getlicker, which is my name. Both the G's are capitalized in that. And then I also have Instagram, which is Gunther underscore Getlicker. Both of those G's are lowercase. And then I have a Twitter, which I go by at OneMikeGG. Both those G's are uppercase. And like I said, I'm trying to work on maybe trying to expand the social media thing, just trying to like do other things to leg out my field of vision. But anyways, I appreciate y'all for listening. This has been the Odd Thoughts podcast. I'm your host, Gunther Getlicker, and just remember, everybody, be excellent to each other.